Hey folks, today I thought I would attempt to make a reaction video to a video from Nick Freitas from a few weeks ago. Nick Freitas, or Freitas, he ran for Republican Congress, as a Republican for Congress in Virginia. He lost. He's a major right-wing media influencer with millions of subscribers. And he's very much a Trumper. He's was against the Affordable Care Act and so on. He's very against trans rights in certain respects. And he made this video which is called "Why Coexistence with Leftism is No Longer Possible" in the wake of Charlie Kirk's murder. And yeah, I thought in a way, I feel like the right-wingers, as we'll see in this video, have put a lot more focus and attention on understanding, or at least, having their own ideas around what leftist ideology is, whereas leftists have often just ignored right-wing influencers. Yeah, I mean, I have a particular leftism perspective because it also involves kind of mysticism, esotericism, what I often talk about is idealism, analytic idealism, or monistic idealism, and also through my interest in somebody like Rudolf Steiner and Gurdjieff and so on, I have a bit of a esoteric Christian perspective. So I want to bring all those ideas into play as we look at what Freitas has to say. Yeah, I found
How do we defeat the left for good? Is that even possible? And what do we mean when...
So just to begin with, he says, how do we defeat the left for good? And yeah, that's already very, aggressive. I mean, I don't expect, as somebody more on the left, that we'll ever be able to defeat, quote unquote, defeat the right for good. I mean, these ideologies or perspectives, are things that have been around for a long time and, change over time, and people have different views on them and so on. But anyway, so even there, I understand he's trying to be, a lot of right-wingers were using Charlie Kirk's death as an opportunity to be extremely aggressive about, their hostility towards leftism. And of course, I mean, we'll probably get into this a little bit more later, but we still don't even know the ideology of Charlie Kirk's killer, if it is the person they caught. Because, yeah, as far as we know, he grew up in a, right-wing, Trump-loving family and Mormon and so on. But the right-wing influencers all glommed onto this idea that this represented a leftist killing. So let's go on.
When we say the left, last episode, we talked about why Charlie Kirk's death has, in fact, changed everything. But we were very specific. It wasn't just his murder. It was the left's response to his murder. We talked about the various criteria that we see going on.
Okay, so here again, as I'm sure some of you watching already understand this, there was no, I mean, I don't, first of all, when he's talking about the left, it sounds like this very monolithic thing. I'm going to get into it later, what he thinks the left is. But what actually was the response? I mean, mainstream Democrats, Bernie Sanders, as far as I could see, almost everybody on the left said they were really, they felt terrible that this had happened. And obviously, we live in a universe where anybody has access to social media. So of course, there were a bunch of, people, marginal people on the edge who might have said, ha ha, Charlie Kirk deserved it or whatever. But you can't use that as something that characterizes, quote unquote, the left. I mean, just as, if somebody on the far right says that, so-and-so should be put in a gas chamber, you can't use that to characterize everybody on the right, so already it's a very, it's a very didactic argument and really opens up a lot of questions over whether what he's saying.
Within political discourse, we talked about things like the different sides of the political spectrum having diametrically opposed worldviews. We talked about the glorification of political violence. And we talked about what happens when a political movement has a critical mass which believes these things and is willing to openly celebrate it. And we came to the conclusion that's where the left is at in this country.
I mean, I have to go back, I guess, and watch that last video. I really don't know this guy very well. But I mean, I haven't really seen glorification of political violence on anybody that I've viewed across the left. I mean, there definitely are, marginal, weird leftist people, just as there are marginal, weird rightist people, and some of them might have little groups and they share marginal, weird ideas. But as a whole, I mean, if I take somebody like Bernie Sanders or AOC as kind of like representing the mainstream left, I mean, there's nothing about violence in what they're talking about.
We also came to the conclusion that this is not something where the right woke up one day and declared the left our enemies. Rather, what we recognize is that for well over a decade now, perhaps even longer, the left has considered us their enemy. And we just stopped disagreeing with that definition. So, what do we do about it? Well, that's what we're going to discuss on today's episode. And we're going to get specific. And this isn't going to be, well, just vote harder. No, we're going to talk about what we do as individuals, what we do as part of a movement, and what we should expect out of the Trump administration over the next 4 years, out of Congress, in order to actually achieve our objectives. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit from military terms, because when I went on the Sean Ryan show, he asked me a question. He goes, Nick, you were a Green Beret. And the Green Berets were the guys that we kind of send in to either conduct unconventional warfare or conduct counterinsurgency. In short, we're the guys that are either destabilizing a nation or trying to bring stability to it. And he said, how do you do that? And I gave him an explanation. And if you want to see that, go check out that episode on Sean Ryan. But today, I'm going to go a little bit more into what has happened in our own country and how we reverse the various trends that have taken place and get to a place where we can have civil disagreements with one another, but that sort of society requires some sort of shared commitment to fundamental principles which doesn't currently exist. All of that coming up on this episode of Making the Argument. I am your host, Nick Freitas. With me in the studio, my beautiful bride, Tina, Queen of the Bees.
Hello, everyone.
Sporting her cowgirl boots. Right? And then, of course, we have our resident historian, our political prognosticator, the Oracle of Virginia, Christian Hines. How are you doing, Christian?
Sporting my flannel.
He's always flirting his flannel.
So.
We're gonna make everyone get cowboy boots at some point. We're going to we're moving past the idea of you can just choose what footwear you want, and we're going to mandate it through central planning.
So we're going that type of right wing.
No more hey dudes.
Yeah. Okay. So first things first, let's frame this up. So when we say the left, we do not mean like your neighbor who tends to vote Democrat who wants a slightly higher marginal tax rate, right? That person may be on the left when it comes to their political philosophy, but they're not a leftist, right? To give you a more kind of, maybe a more open definition of this, Bill Maher is definitely on the left, but I wouldn't consider him a leftist in the sense of what we're talking about here. When we talk about the left, we mean something, or leftist, we mean something pretty specific. And when I talk about this from a military perspective of what is our mission, my mission is to destroy leftist ideology. That I consider that my mission. I want to destroy leftist ideology, and what I mean by that is I want it to be thought of like Nazism is thought of. I want it to be thought of as so morally and socially unacceptable that to call oneself a leftist is to voluntarily accept being ostracized by the rest of the country. Because I believe it is a very, very corrosive, degrading, and at its heart, evil ideology. But what do we mean by that? So Christian, let's talk a little bit about this because, again, it's not just free healthcare, right? That's not what we mean when we talk about leftism.
Although he is against apparently the Affordable Care Act, I don't know what his healthcare plan would be. But I mean, there is a sense, like listening to him, I don't sense, kind of that he's disingenuous. I think that he and his wife, essentially have a set of core beliefs, that are very that are meaningful to them, and I mean, like in theory, I feel like he's somebody I could talk to if we met, Although, as we'll get into it, there's a very big problem where, kind of like belief leads to fanaticism. I mean, he completely believes that, Christianity is an objective truth. And the left's kind of what he calls the left. I mean, I guess that's another problem I wanted to bring up. Like, from my perspective, like, my mother was a book editor in the 60s. She actually edited like Abby Hoffman's first book, Revolution for the Hell of It, and so on, and books by different, feminists and even like black, power kind of figures and so on. I mean, yeah, a lot of societies in Europe have an organic left and an organic right, and they have parliaments, and they have to form kind of like, kind of governments based on these kind of affiliations or make alliances and so on. I mean, the U.S. has always been sort of hampered by this two-party system, and also as the empire that was sort of dominating and controlling a lot of the world, particularly after the Second World War. We had a very kind of, there was he talks about destroying them, but actually the left was kind of destroyed, I would say, in the 60s and 70s. There was an organic left that wanted to emerge at that point, but, they, let's say people in the military, industrial, intelligence complex really were not having it, so you had the sort of, murder, shooting down of unarmed protesters at Kent State. You had the assassination of, figures like Freddie Hampton, who was like a Black Panther leader in Chicago, or, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., JFK. So, yeah, it sort of feels like, there has been a lot of sort of militarization on the part of the right. And, whatever Charlie Kirk's killing actually, means for the country, it certainly was very advantageous and opportunistic for those people who kind of, are seeking to further advance their right-wing ideology and agenda and their kind of Christian nationalist agenda right now.
It's not really just a set of policies. James Lindsay, your favorite person on the planet, you and James get along so well. But James Lindsay has probably done some of the best work actually articulating that no, leftism, this kind of wokeism, this woke ideology, or woke consciousness as he describes it, is actually a secular religion. It's not just a moral philosophy, it's a secular religion. How would you agree with that statement?
He's not the only one that's come to that conclusion.
I know you don't want to give James credit.
Well, I'm not going to, because he didn't come up with the term, but he has articulated this. Yes, he is one of many people that has articulated this. But no, I mean the left, as we think about it, is a secular religion. Mm-hmm. It has all the hallmarks of it. I would argue that it's what happens when you take Christianity and you actually strip Christ out of Christianity.
I don't think it's. I want to give it that much credit, but
Okay, I mean, I don't know James Lindsay. I'm just looking at him on Wikipedia. I mean, obviously, there's what we've seen over the last 15 years, and in retrospect, I'm very sorry that I wasn't like paying closer attention, is a sort of growth of the right-wing media ecosystem to the point where it's now larger than, the sort of, I would say neutral, but they would say left, or you could say liberal progressive media ecosystem. And there are figures like this guy, James Lindsay, or known as Conceptual James. Let's see, he submitted hoax articles to academic journals to test scholarship and quote unquote rigor in academic fields. He's written cynical theories, and he promotes right-wing conspiracy theories such as cultural Marxism and LGBT grooming conspiracy theories. All right, I haven't really checked him out yet, but I'll add him to the list. I'm still trying to deal with this guy, and then with Matt Walsh, also a very problematic guy who openly describes himself as a theocratic fascist, and like Freitas has millions of followers.
Get what you're saying.
Like the idea of wokeism being, I mean, there's subsegments of this theory. I mean, there's one theory that wokeism is a form of secular Protestantism. I've made that argument before. I know that some people would disagree, but the point is that it does function like a religion. It has all the hallmarks of it. It has its own rituals. It has its own dogmas. It has its own priestly caste, right? Mm-hmm. We've had other people who argue with Lindsay. Yarvin came up with this concept of the cathedral. He used religious, religious connotations when he was describing the institutions that they've colonized. So there's plenty of people that have kind of all come to this conclusion. And the reason for it is because of what you said earlier, that it's not like you're dealing with, oh, well, I want government-run healthcare, or I want free college. You're dealing with a specific worldview that approaches history as it's moving towards an end goal, right? It's this view of, they call themselves progressives, right? It's this idea that we're progressing towards something, and what's that we're progressing towards? Endless liberation, right? Yeah. Total liberation of the individual. And they don't mean it in just like the libertarian sense. What they mean it by is you should be free from all unchosen obligations. Now, this is the distinction that John Rawls has between political liberalism and comprehensive liberalism. A liberal or a libertarian or a classical liberal.
I don't really understand what the hell he's talking about, to be honest. To be free of all unchosen obligations. I mean, that seems to be much more in alignment with, like, Peter Thiel and the sort of techno-libertarian oligarchs who don't want to pay taxes. I mean, my understanding of leftism, maybe I'm crazy, but I think the idea is that, everybody owes more of a debt to society as a whole. And it also feels like, progressivism is different than Marxism. I mean, Marxism came out of Hegelian philosophy or ideology, and there was an idea in Hegel that there was a dialectic leading to some kind of absolute consciousness in a positive sense. Hegel maybe saw himself as prefiguring that absolute consciousness. And Marx kind of took that and transposed it into the dialectic into the political realm, arguing that there were this dialectic between classes, that ultimately there would be liberation as the workers would take over control of the society from the aristocrats or nobility or oligarchs or bourgeois and so on, which obviously hasn't really happened yet. But I don't know. I question a lot of how he's saying this here.
Would look at this and say, well, I support eliminating some unchosen obligations. They would say the tyranny of the king, right? Or an oppressive tyrant, or a tyrannical authoritarian government. But there's a lot of unchosen obligations that are out there that are actually essential to maintaining civilization, like the family, like the nation. Like, you are not, when you were born, it's not as if your consciousness was this free-floating thing that chose a soul to inhabit. You are the product of generations of history that came before you. Even the very language that you're using to articulate your thoughts and your speech, you didn't come up with that. That came from thousands of years of the evolution of, in our case, the English language. And the same thing of your nation is the product of hundreds of years of history. Your family, your lineage is the product of hundreds of years of history. So if you want to liberate the individual from all unchosen obligations, what you're going to produce is a fully atomized individual that's divorced from any relations with anybody else.
Customs, religion, tradition, and anything that could be said to be imposed on one just by the very nature of its existence. And I think you also see this in the way they talk about rights. It's fast.
But I mean, hasn't the main force of atomizing and alienating individuals been capitalism, which inexorably takes things that people used to do for themselves and their communities and turns it into commodities? So like, people used to hang out around a fire and tell stories. Now they sit at home and they watch Netflix. People used to go to the spring in New York City on Spring Street and pick up water and drink it. Now if they want decent water, they have to buy Evian or Perrier or something. I mean, it feels like they're blaming the left for stuff, but isn't it capitalism that really has done this massive work of alienating everybody in order to turn everything into markets and commodities?
Because they will make these false equivalencies between, like, human beings are the only ones that have to work to survive. Like, no, everything has to work to survive. Or they'll say they're the only ones that need money to survive. No, money is actually money is a human invention which actually makes surviving and transactions significantly easier. You're right.
Okay, so I mean, once again, there's a lot of preconceptions and ideologies kind of built in almost everything he's talking about. But I mean, if you look at, like, Marshall Sahlins wrote a book called Stone Age Economics, and it has been noted by a number of archaeologists and anthropologists that a lot of indigenous cultures in the past, didn't really work in the same way, that people in the sort of modern Protestant, societies that are invested in the Protestant work ethic and the spirit of capitalism are forced to work. And in fact, I mean, Sahlins in that book writes about how, when the colonialists came to the New World and they saw how happy the native people were and how much time they had for their families and their children and just for being together, it actually kind of enraged them because it felt wrong to them from this, ethos that they developed of like everybody has to work all the time to survive. So it's not clear to me that working all the time to survive is something that humans do need to do, and I think it's worth thinking through that a bit more. I mean, this is one of he cited Curtis Yarvin, who's such a deeply problematic influence and thinker, and Yarvin's whole idea is that the U.S. should be run like a corporation with a CEO dictator, and everybody has to like work with everything they've got for that CEO dictator, and if they don't make it, then maybe they turn into a useless, kind of despised underclass. And Yarvin has even joked about converting the underclass to biodiesel, in a very fascist manner. So I don't know if this, if I don't personally agree that work is this ultimate signifier of human dignity or human potentiality.
The cow doesn't need to use currency in order to get the grass. Would you like to go live off of eating grass? Like, would you like to join the cow
in the state of nature, right?
In the state of nature that Jean-Jacques Rousseau is so enamored with. But I think that
he's obviously just missing the point. I mean, there was a lot of good data. You can read David Graeber's book, The Dawn of Everything. I mentioned Marshall Sahlins' book, The Gift by Marcel Mauss, that our way of organizing, work and money in modern, mercantile and industrial civilization. Yeah, it's not necessarily optimal, and people actually are forced to do a lot of, degrading things. And there were indigenous cultures, in the jungles, in the forests, and so on, that in some ways they might have had superior lifestyles than we did. But of course, from this perspective and this sort of imperial Christian ideology, you can't even like think about that.
When you look at it. So if you look at, we'll say the structure of Christianity. The structure of Christianity is this idea, I believe a true idea, I'm a Christian, that there is a God.
Just want to say, it's a very funny thing to say, I believe a true idea. I mean, that really doesn't make any sense. I mean, if something is true, then it's true if you believe it. That doesn't make it more or less true. But anyway, we'll get more to that later.
God created the earth. He created morality, like he's the source of truth, of love, of justice.
Okay, I mean, what's the basis for this belief in this God that created truth and justice and morality? I mean, we're going to have to go into that, right?
He created human beings. Human beings were given the option to not follow God. We engaged in sin. There's consequences for those sins. In order for God to maintain love and justice, there has to be a way to reconcile that while maintaining justice. So you can't just forgive everything that was done, or else justice isn't satisfied. And if we just all die off as a result, well, then the question is God really loving us? So God maintains love and justice through this process of saying, look, I'm going to pay the penalty in the form of Jesus Christ in order to provide reconciliation. But you still have to choose that reconciliation. And so when you look at all of these things, there's this.
Okay, so I mean, I guess that's his view of Christianity. I mean, I'm an esoteric Christian. I think this whole idea. I mean, my views on it are complicated. I mean, and I think everybody needs to develop their own personal relationship with, the absolute or divinity and so on. And there's a range of different options, that we can consider. But I mean, I sort of see kind of like. It wasn't like a way of avoiding divine retribution and that we are, saved just by believing in this divinity of this figure. It's more like Christ was showing us a model or a template of how to be in the world, which, kind of involved resistance to tyranny, love, generosity, magic, kind of a healing and so on. Anyway, we'll probably get back more to that later.
Whether you believe it or not, there's a very coherent and logical thought process within this idea of Christianity and Christian faith. And then God also commands us to do things. Like we are commanded to see other people as made in the image.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of coherent and logical philosophies out there. I mean, Buddhism is quite coherent and logical. I would probably say a lot more coherent and logical, but he's a believer that he has the truth, which, I guess in a way, as we'll maybe talk more about later, makes him a bit of a fanatic.
Image of God. And so there's this inherent dignity which exists as a result of being created in the image of God. But not all actions are dignified. Not all actions are moral, right? There's sinful actions and then there's righteous actions. And so
isn't it interesting how the left's approach to Christianity is always, tolerance and forgive.
Yes.
But at the same token, they've also divorced the Christ figure from it. This is why I said that there is this argument that leftism is a replacement of Christianity, stealing certain elements of Christian metaphysics while leaving out the most important component, which is obviously the Christ figure. So there's no redemption. I told you this like a year ago or 2 years ago that like leftism is if you had Christianity but no redemption, no forgiveness of sins, right? You have to perpetually apologize for your whiteness or your toxic masculinity. There's no Christ figure. And we've taken all of these moral frameworks, the universal application of it, but we've divorced it from the morality through which you're supposed to be applying it. So what it creates is this like suicidally empathetic.
Well, I think there's...
Okay, if you know my work, you know that I've written a lot about the mystical experience. My first book, Breaking Open the Head, was around psychedelic shamanism, and I had many kind of transcendent, transpersonal, visionary experiences, supernatural experiences. So I ended up drifting away from, far away from secular materialism. And I do kind of agree with him about a few things that he's saying. I do believe that, I guess you could say leftism is secular religion. The question is, what do you do when you're trapped in this materialist belief system? How do you create a moral framework or kind of an ultimate system of values? And I really don't think, I think that you can't. And that's one of the crises that's being kind of like revealed by our current situation. And why kind of this far-right Christian nationalism has risen up. Now, as an idealist, my belief is that the underlying baseline reality is consciousness, primordial awareness, and everything kind of arises out of this foundation of this substrate of pure consciousness, which is kind of like awareness without a subject or non-duality. And I think that, as probably we'll get into a bit more as this goes on, that view also allows you to reconstruct a moral and ethical universe that has meaning and purpose, but it isn't stuck in these sort of obsolete ideologies that then lead to all the stuff that these guys believe around transgenderism being evil or abortion being an absolute wrong and so on. But we'll get into that later.
I think there's an important distinction here that needs to be made. If you kind of look at what wokeism is attempting to achieve, or critical theory is attempting to achieve, there's a couple of what we might call doctrinal, presuppositions. One is this idea of oppressor versus oppressed, and it's this idea that to completely be free from oppression is to be free from any of the limiting aspects that prevents you from being your authentic self. So it's kind of this like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? We all need food, we all need shelter, and then we need, some form of like satisfaction or recreation. But then at the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is this idea of self-actualization. It's this idea of the most authentically version of you possible. Now, what's interesting is that what you really see from a lot of this is this idea of you getting to be your own God.
Yes.
Right? That is whether it's explicit or not, it's in there. And what's interesting is you go all the way back.
Yeah, I don't know. I sort of like agree with this guy to a certain point here and there. Then he makes a leap, and I'm like, what is he talking about? Once again, the people who are very fascinated with becoming their own gods are these sort of right-wing tech oligarchs like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, who've made a temporary alliance with reactionary Christianity because it benefits their interests. as we know, Thiel has been doing this whole series on the Antichrist, where he basically argues that the Antichrist is any effort to limit or restrict the development of artificial intelligence or other forms of technologies that might allow them to ultimately become immortal by being able to rewrite the genetic system or the bioengineer immortal life, or merge with silicon ultimately. So those are the people who are really most interested in becoming gods, as far as I can see. Then he just seems like he's conflating. So there's like traditional leftism, which was Marxism, which looked towards a kind of revolution that would lead to the liberation, the emancipation of the working class. There's progressivism or liberalism, which more is kind of like capitalism with a happy face, that wants capitalist progress and some level of technology, but also some regulation and controls, progressive taxation, environmental regulations to avert climate catastrophe, and actually, that I just did an interview with Brett Scott, an economist, and we he's been writing about the problems that have now been revealed around that ideology. And then there's wokeism, identity politics, which I also have a lot of problems with, and feel like that was it created an easy target for this right-wing movement, and and I think there you have a problem with the scientific materialist, the secular materialist ethos or paradigm, where there really isn't any ultimate value. So then they kind of looking for something to make a kind of ultimate value. They settled on identity and oppression and victimization. And I do think that was a mistake. It was something that I never agreed with. That's. But on the other hand, if we look at things as a dialectical process, to some extent, maybe not as strictly as Hegel or Marx does, then perhaps all of this has to follow in a sequence for us to reach like a different type of understanding.
There's a reason why Saul Alinsky, who we're going to talk about later, is a very, important figure on the left. There's a reason why he dedicated his book Rules for Radicals to Lucifer. The first edition of it, he dedicated to Lucifer as the first rebel who won himself a kingdom, because in Christian theology, Satan is cast down from heaven to earth. But what's interesting is if you look at how sin entered humanity, it all started with a question that Satan asked to Eve. And the question that Satan asked Eve is, did God really say? And then he questions God's truth. He says, well, God gave you one truth claim, and then Satan gives you another truth claim in the garden. And that truth claim is, for on the day you will eat, you will become like God, knowing the difference between good and evil. And so what does Satan do? Satan is giving a form of self-actualization. What Satan is doing is Satan is telling Eve, you will be able to be like God once you possess this classification of knowledge, which is interesting because if you look at it, there's a similar conversation that takes place between Lucifer and God when Satan says in Scripture, I will become like the Most High. And so when we say that this version of leftism is its own theology, what we mean is it seeks to replace God and essentially replace it with the idea that you can be your own God. And this idea of what Marx called like the dictatorship of the proletariat is that we're now going to all get to be our little own gods, but then we work in concert with one another to create this utopia.
Yes.
Which
I just still don't really understand where he's getting this idea that leftism has to do with people becoming their own gods. I mean, I guess there's like somebody like Flaubert, but he wasn't left. He was like a middle-class bourgeoisie who said, live like a bourgeoisie, think like a god. Nietzsche talked about becoming a Superman or an Ubermensch, but in a way, Nietzsche was, even though this American translator, Walter Kaufman, tried to kind of rehabilitate Nietzsche for, liberal humanism and the left to some extent, ultimately his idea construct, really does toggle more, right-wing, fascist, even kind of extreme kind of ideas. But he talked about the Ubermensch, the Superman, and so on. I think that most people who are on the left, that I know, and I've known a lot in my life, really just want a more equitable situation. I mean, it's like, just because somebody gets lucky and inherits a trust fund or in business, does that really mean that they should have, so many more, opportunities, so much more pleasure than somebody else who maybe didn't get so lucky? I mean, I don't know. I don't really know what the hell he's talking about, to be honest, when he keeps talking about leftists want everyone to be a god. It feels like just sort of a mind trip he's on.
Which is heaven on earth through the dictatorship of the proletariat. And the reason why it's important to understand it within this framework is because whereas God is offering an objective truth and an objective morality for which he is the author, and it's not up to us to decide what that truth is. It's not up for us to decide what the morality is. We discover it. It is revealed. And then God says, operate within this framework. And operate within this framework and positive things will happen. Operate outside of this framework and negative things happen. Satan turns that on its head. It's like, no, you get to decide the moral.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like, okay, so he grew up in this Christian worldview and this ideology, and therefore there's a strong assumption that has to be like the truth or something, and that God operates in this way. And I mean, isn't he being very presumptuous in that sense to think that he can understand, how God would choose to operate or whatever, based on what a priest has told him or the Bible says? I mean, yeah, it feels very flimsy to me. For me, I really struggle to understand this adherence to these ancient scriptures. I think it's becoming deeply problematic. I guess I had hoped when I wrote my first book, Breaking Open the Head, that psychedelics would help people break free of these old ideologies and belief systems. But in a way, now we're seeing the psychedelic experience kind of reintegrated back into Christianity and libertarianism and stuff.
Moral framework.
Well, in the same token, the left does the same thing. They reject the framework and say, no, the framework isn't neutral and the framework is not divinely ordained. The framework is you have set this up as the oppressor in order to put yourself at the, in order to construct a hierarchy and put yourself at the pinnacle of society. And so.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I have to admit that is how I see kind of Christianity in a way. Like, I feel that, I really like John Lash's book, Not in His Image. And John Lash in that book argues that the Gnostics were not a heretical sect of Christianity. They were inheritors of the mystery school wisdom of the ancient world, like the Eleusinian mysteries that went on for 2,000 years or something. And in the 4th century AD, when Christianity started to become a mainstream force in Rome and Constantinople and so on, they tried to raise the alarm that was really problematic, that it was actually, from their perspective, a archonic deviation. They talked about the archons as these sort of super sensible beings who are like invisible, behind the scenes, ruled by a being called the demiurge. That's why you have all these Gnostic Gospels that were rediscovered in 1945, and some of them may actually predate the canonical Gospels, like the Gospel of Thomas, in which Christ says, you should open the door for yourself to see what is. So it was much more the Gnostic idea, the mystery school tradition. Maybe in Eleusis they had a, kykeon, like a potion that might have been something like LSD or LSA or something. But the idea was to, open the door for yourself to see what is, initiate yourself directly in the visionary experience and transcendence. So yeah, you could be an equal with everybody else, with your brothers and sisters, so it wasn't about this hierarchical system of indoctrination and control, which, yeah, I would say that that's what Christianity has been and what it is again today.
We are now awakened. This is where the term woke is coming from. We're now awakened to the fact that these are not neutral rules and they're not divinely ordained rules. They're rules that the oppressors have set up. They're norms that the oppressors have set up in order to set themselves at the top of the hierarchy.
Yeah, their argument is no, you use God as a moral excuse for doing
elevate
the evil
yourself.
things you would.
Well, if you look right now, there's I don't know if you guys saw previews for a cartoon coming out to basically say that God is the bad guy.
Yeah.
And poor Lucifer, and kind of follows Lucifer, and it's a cartoon for children.
Yeah.
So
So if you look,
it definitely brings that oppressor-oppressed thing.
yes, that dynamic. So
the forefront.
if you look at all of this, and obviously this is manifested in different ways. Somebody in the chat asked, is this just like paganism? It actually isn't, because even within a lot of your pagan traditions, whether you're talking about Odin or whether you're talking about Zoroaster or whatnot, there was still, I believe those are false religions, but they still pointed to something that was transcendent and outside themselves.
Yeah, he believes those are false religions, and yet he is very special because he has the true religion, which he believes to be true, and therefore it is objective truth.
Leftism is purely immanent.
Yes.
It's in the world. It kind of rejects transcendence, or it rejects transcendence that's beyond
the divine.
The desire of the individual.
Yeah.
The self-will is the only thing that...
So if you look at their sacred dogmas, it's what are they constantly appealing to? Well, they're appealing to this notion of equality or equity. They're appealing to this notion of progress. They're appealing to this notion of, liberation from anything that is preventing you from being your authentic self, right? These are kind of like these dogmas that they're pushing toward.
Yeah, once again, he always makes these little weird jumps, like liberation from your authentic self. I don't know. I really like Oscar Wilde's essay, "The Soul of Man Under Socialism," Wilde actually looked forward to a future where we would develop more sophisticated machines and we could alleviate people of drudgery, so everybody could cultivate, their unique individuality, their unique essence, their unique personality, which most people don't get the time to do because they have to work all the time in this capitalist, industrial mega machine. And I would love to see everybody given the time and the opportunity and the capital, in a sense, to cultivate themselves and develop their unique essence rather than working more or less as slaves all the time with a very few people at the top, building, $100 million yachts and lording it over and giant, underground complexes in Hawaii in case the world goes to hell, and sort of lording it over everybody else. I don't think that makes any sense. I don't think it is anything like the ethos of Christ in the Bible. So, we just seem to be of a difference of opinion here.
And they have their rituals, right? Your DEI statements, your
land
acknowledgements, pride parades, like all of these things are things that you are expected to participate in to demonstrate.
Yeah, once again, it's just so annoying. I mean, I found DEI irritating. I can find land acknowledgements a little bit irritating. But, I think they also were, and as I said, I don't feel that these guys are necessarily inauthentic. And I don't get that sense. But, I think that a lot of that stuff was an authentic, heartfelt effort to address, discriminations, destructive things in the past. And, we did take the land from the indigenous people here. We consciously committed, genocide in some cases, giving them blankets with smallpox, chasing them out of their ancestral lands. We believe that we had the right to do that for whatever reason because of our Christianity. And these guys are just continuing that imperial Christianity with really no self-reflection about it and just wanting to project out against people who, began to have a more complex view of history.
Straight your loyalty to those dogmas.
They even have their own liturgical calendar.
Yeah.
Right? Pride Month. What was it? A couple days ago was another LGBTQ holiday that they've created. Like they've constructed not just rituals, they've also constructed festival days and feast days. And that's why I said it's almost like a liturgical
Creed,
calendar.
You got.
Well, and that's because some people will say, well, Nick, this is ridiculous. I know people that are woke, but they go to church. Okay, but watch very carefully
Which
the way
churches do they go to?
Yeah, if they go to, for instance, I was watching one at a so-called Episcopal church, and it's obviously not an Episcopalian church in the traditional sense, but they're getting up there, and there's very, very little mention of the gospel. In fact, you will see the so-called priests or clergy within these churches violate centuries of tradition of Christianity. They will violate all of the core doctrines of Christianity. So what they're doing is they're putting on Christianity as a kind of a robe, but Christianity is made subservient to their dogmas and their doctrines.
They're using it as a means to push their ideology.
Right, and the LGBTQ groups aren't the first to do that either. No. There are a lot of other groups in the.
Yeah, but you guys are also pushing an ideology, correct? You have a idea of what's right and wrong, and you're pushing that, and you believe it's true. So why wouldn't other people get to have their ideas of what's right and wrong, and their festivals for people that they think deserve compassion or celebration? I don't get it. I don't get it.
In the past, who basically their main issue is whatever social doctrine
Yes.
they care about, and then they try to bring in Christian elements to undergird it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's well, and this goes back to Gramsci. We've talked a lot about Antonio Gramsci and the March to the Institutions, but it's this idea that what Gramsci was talking about was you use the existing structures, you infiltrate the existing culturally shaping structures, whether it be religious, social, political, economic, arts and entertainment, and you use those to undermine the existing structure and then supplant it with your own. So,
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I haven't read enough Gramsci, I guess. I mean, he was an Italian, I guess, communist who died in prison, I think, and wrote these prison diaries and wrote a lot about hegemony, how, kind of economic relationships and, political power also have a cultural dimension, ideology, and a rhetoric surrounding them. Sure, I mean, the world, I mean, these guys are saying that they have this true, whatever, they're slightly fanatic about they're having this truth, and other people feel that, this imperial Christianity was really part of the problem. And, we've seen things like liberation theology in South America, where, and really when you go back to the words of Jesus in the Bible, they actually support more this idea of, equity and sharing and love for the stranger, compassion for the other. They don't really support whatever these guys are talking about.
So those which you can subvert and control, you do that. Those which you can't subvert and control, you destroy or you compete with. So, and again, to your say, they have their own priest class.
Yeah, once again, this feels like, projection, which is something that right-wingers do all the time. I mean, control of consciousness through the media and now through, Christianity and these churches and Turning Point and so on. That's all something that really these guys seem to be obsessed with doing. I think the mistake of sometimes the mistake of my own mistake in a way was feeling that reason was a more powerful instrument than it actually is. And recently I've been reading George Lakoff's work, Don't Think of an Elephant, he wrote, and he really talks about how it's, control of framing, control of rhetoric, control of language is something that the right really mastered and the left really neglected in a way.
That's right. This is the academics. This is your HR. This is your political officers, right? It's the media. These are the guys that are instructing you on the proper way to think about these things, lest you fall into the heresies, which are the heretics are the oppressors, right? Or the conservatives, the traditionalists, the Christians, right? These guys are necessarily their enemies. This is why I said before, it's this idea that it's not as if we woke up one day and said, hey, you guys are all our enemies. We got treated like enemies for so long, and we've just kind of stopped pretending that we're not anymore.
Yeah, once again, I really don't know how this guy can be saying this. I mean, it seems like the right wing has much more done this work. I mean, I guess there's different lefts. I mean, there's some like marginal radical left, and I'm sure there are people there who have done the things that he's talking about. It's a big country and a big world. But I mean, yeah, look what happened when that poor, Minneapolis politician, Democratic politician, was killed with her husband, and the way that even mainstream right-wing figures responded to that. There was very little condolence. There was like mocking. That really was an act of right-wing terrorism. And we know the majority of terrorist acts are coming from the right, like the vast majority. In fact, the Trump administration removed a report from the Department of Justice in 2024, which said that it was something like 75% of acts of stochastic terrorism were right wing. So, and the reason that's happening is because of a vast ideological effort through Reddit forums and 4chan and all this stuff, which is radicalizing all of these young people who are then joining the Proud Boys, or becoming incels or whatever. So yeah, I think he's being very disingenuous with his rhetoric here.
And why is that important? Because if you recognize this ideology for what it is, that's where you recognize what I was trying to illustrate in that tweet that I did the day Charlie was murdered, where I said, this is no longer a civil discussion between fellow countrymen on trivial matters, right? Or even important matters. This is a war, and I was very specific in how I said this. This is a war between diametrically opposed worldviews. And that's what Speaker Don's kind of, I can't believe this can't be true. Yes, it can. It absolutely can. Why? Because I can point to everything you want within society. I can point to the roles that you believe that government should play. I can point to the things that you want taught in our schools. I can point to all the things that you want in the public space, subsidized by taxes, codified by law, and enforced by the government. And I can say, I can't accept that.
Okay, I'm going to probably stop here for now. Partially because I'm about to run out of battery. But maybe we'll come back and do more on this in a little bit. Yeah, man, it's a tough situation. From my perspective, it is these guys who have gone, a little bit nuts and very extreme. They seem to think the same of, what they call the left, whatever that means for them, which, as we see, there's different facets to it. It's not always the same thing that they're going after. I do appreciate when he said that he doesn't believe that, people should be, necessarily killed because they support universal health care or whatever. They should just be ideologically beaten down, I guess. But yeah, I want to come back to this and keep going. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope it was helpful, and more to come.